Greetings, Attorney Derek DeBras here, Munitions Law Group, munitionsgroup.com. Go ahead and click that little bell icon. Make sure you follow us on social media. Make sure you go ahead and follow us here on YouTube. Go ahead and also feel free to drop comments with questions. We'll put them in the queue, try to get to them as we progress forward. And remember, I do appear as much as I can on a podcast, Munitions Podcast, with criminal defense attorney Steve Palmer. We just did one with the owner of LABT Firearms and Range in Columbus, Ohio. They actually have their own radio show that they record there in-house at their firearms range every Saturday. So it was a really good podcast. Check us out there as well, wherever you might get podcasts. Today, I want to talk to you guys about the platforms of our two presidential candidates, or what we think might be our two presidential candidates. Obviously, Trump is clearly the Republican national candidate for president. It's questionable whether or not President Biden, today is July 19th, we'll see after this weekend if he is the candidate, but I've been wanting to do this for some time. We're getting about to the right time before the election that I think it's important we start talking about the issue of which you tune into this channel for, and that is firearms and firearms rights, all things guns, and the Second Amendment, and how the candidates, how do they fare when held against the fire when it comes to defending our rights. So what I did today is I went ahead and went through their campaign websites. And a lot of us know the history of both presidents. Both have been president. Both have a very clear record on gun rights and what their views are of the Second Amendment. But at least want to talk today about what else they would have found. And what's interesting about this election cycle, and there's been some news articles on this, at least for when the Republican National Platform came out, that guns are not really taking front and center stage in this election, not dramatically in any event. So let's start with Trump's platform. We all know Trump's history. He served 4 years as our president, and Mr. Trump, for the most part, has been very pro-gun. The one big thing I can remember that was more anti-gun, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, was the bump stock ban that he signed an executive order to essentially establish that they were machine guns. We all know that the United States Supreme Court this past summer came up with an opinion that says, no, they're not machine guns. It was a great decision. And to Trump's credit, he said, he'd respect that decision. That's their job. And this is how they came down on it. So, whether or not why Trump did it, we can all hypothesize as to why he did it. At the end of the day, I think of it this way. One, what's our options, right? It's not like Trump was out there banning, handguns, rifles, suppressors, anything like that. This was a novelty accessory, I would say. I never personally owned one. I think we should have the right to own one, of course. But that is something to keep in mind. In addition to that, his son, Trump Jr., is a huge advocate of the shooting community. I know he's a big game hunter, I believe. He's also an avid shooter. Some of my clients that own dealerships and gun ranges have met him and know him and have talked with him. They say he's very much an advocate for that cause. So I'm not overly concerned with Trump's position. I will say online, the only thing I found, and if you go to his campaign website, it's by and large just the Republican National Party's platform. And it says under item number 7 that the platform for 2024 is to defend our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to keep and bear arms. That's the only instance where it's mentioned. But again, I'm very optimistic that if Trump is in office, things not only will not be, there'll be no further harm will come to the Second Amendment, but I think a lot will be reversed as well. Namely, how ATF has been, in my opinion, weaponized against the industry in a lot of instances. You saw zero tolerance come out under the Biden administration for dealers that have FFL licenses, federal firearms licenses. And for those of you that don't remember or aren't aware, what zero tolerance is we call them the 5 deadly sins. The Biden administration said, if any of these 5 things happen when a dealer or an FFL licensee is inspected, automatically revoke them. And that's kept us busy as a law firm. We've had to actually defend clients in several revocation hearings. And prior to this administration, it was rare that you actually got that far. Normally you could work with the ATF, the industry would work in hand with them to try and resolve these, what are oftentimes clerical issues, bookkeeping errors. Not all the time, but oftentimes. So that is probably the biggest item I would say as an attorney that I have noticed in the industry is this zero tolerance. And it's funny, in the revocation hearings, they will not let you ask about it. We as attorneys will try to cross-examine ATF agents and auditors about zero tolerance, and the DIO, the director of industry operations in whatever field division, almost immediately would shut us down. We've never gotten one to the court level, district court on appeal. We've won most all of them, not quite all of them, but most all of them. And sometimes they just get too expensive to continue on, and ATF knows that. But regarding the Biden administration, we know his history. One of his big pieces of legislation regarding firearms was the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which I think is hilarious because I don't think our communities are really any more safe after they pass this. But what that did was a variety of things, but one was expand the need to have a license in order to sell firearms. They want to make it as difficult as possible to sell firearms. And they want to criminalize you if you do outside of what they believe should be ethical and moral in their own opinion. I remember as a child, you go to a gun show, you buy a gun and walk out the door, and they're really trying to slam that down and get that shut with more background checks, just more regulation, more steps you have to go through in order to invoke this right. On his website, on the campaign's website, I should say, the only thing it really mentions is that Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And it basically, he states on the website, it will keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, narrow the boyfriend loophole, and expand mental health and safety services in schools. I like how they like to term things that are lawful loopholes to make it sound so underhanded, right? Well, it wasn't a loophole. It just was the law. The law said what it said. And quite honestly, the law already had a catch-all for what was termed similarly situated people to the relationship element definition of domestic violence offenders. So it already had a pretty broad definition, and they just kind of narrowed that in and honed it into a 5-year look back if you were dating in what they now term a dating relationship. So that's one of the things the Bipartisan Safer Community Act did. I also found an old publication. I remember reading this last year in March of 2023 that goes through the fact sheet of after President Biden announced some executive orders on gun violence. I'm going to read you one paragraph because I think that's good to kind of jostle your memory and let us not forget where this administration stands on the Second Amendment. And it said, last year, President Biden signed into the law the Bipartisan Safer Community Act, the most significant gun violence reduction legislation enacted in 30 years. When celebrating the act's passage, he called on Congress to seize the bipartisan momentum and advance additional common sense steps to reduce gun violence. He has called for Congress to act, including banning assault rifles, weapons, I should say, and high-capacity magazines, neither of which is defined in this document, mind you, requiring background checks for all gun sales, requiring safe storage of firearms, closing the dating violence restraining order loophole, and repealing gun manufacturers' immunity from liability. Some of the other things they mention here is they increase the number of background checks by ensuring that all background checks required by law are conducted before purchases, and they also are pushing red flag orders. For those of you that don't remember what red flag orders are, basically, depending on how the law is written, neighbor, family, whoever, if they think you're a threat, can call the police. They can come take your guns without due process for a period of time until there's a hearing, and then basically you're disarmed for a period of time. All right, so not much to say. Obviously, the Biden administration is no friend of the Second Amendment. If they had their druthers, I am confident they would ban as many guns as possible, leaving you with maybe a shotgun and maybe some lever-action rifles, and that's probably about all they would want you to have, if that. I think the Trump administration is also a known quantity, and on the good side, I don't think that they're going to do anything to hurt the Second Amendment. I think you could see potentially some progress. I'd like to see silencers taken on the National Firearms Act registry, getting that regulation away from just suppressors. I don't think it's necessary, and I know under the last Trump administration they're moving toward that. And I think, if I remember my history correctly, there was a active killer situation in Virginia Beach, and I think a suppressor was used, which kind of put the kibosh on that. But hopefully that comes back up, and we can make some movement on that. But look, if Trump gets elected, I think that's the best thing to protect our gun rights, to be quite frank with you. I think if Biden or, dare I say, Kamala Harris, become president, I especially if there's another horrific incident with a mass shooting, I think they're going to push extremely hard to further regulate our firearms. So I just want to come to you guys, give you my thoughts. Feel free to drop your thoughts in the window. Obviously, none of this is science. This is politics. Things are fluid. Things change. People have their own agendas. But I will try to keep you all informed as much as I can if anything new comes out during the campaign season over the next handful of months. And as always, be safe and carry on.